a plastic bag, a tiny skull, duct tape, found half a mile from home. In December 2008, skeletal remains are uncovered in a wooded area near the Anthony home. It's Kaylee. The autopsy rules it a homicide, but the exact cause of death, unknown. We dig into the forensic results, public outrage, and the emotional toll on the Anthony family, including George's suicide attempt and the spiraling media storm. As the case grows, so does the prosecution's confidence. They push for the death penalty, citing Casey's behavior, the damning forensic evidence, and the internet searches like chloroform and neck breaking. Meanwhile, defense attorney Jose Baez begins laying the groundwork for an unexpected strategy. This is Scarlet Tavern. Break the glasses.
I mean, that was probably the first proper clink that we've had in a while.
Yeah.
Aggressive.
Yeah, break the glasses. These are crystal. Let's not do that.
I don't think they're real crystal.
Yeah, they are. These are real.
Definitely don't break
Please don't
those.
break these.
Actually, a matter of fact, we'll be changing glasses out to next episode.
Yeah. Yeah, let's use the whiskey glasses, not the crystal whiskey glasses. Okay, so part 2. We're just gonna fucking jump right into this. Again, we still have 2 more parts in this. And yeah. So this is, we will be talking about finding Kaylee's body and all of that. So listener discretion at all times, of course, especially because this is a child.
Yes.
So, I mean, our entire podcast is listener discretion, but
there's certain episodes where
yeah,
make sure you don't have small children in the home.
Or chloroform.
Wow.
So yeah, so let's just get right into it. It had been 154 days since Kaylee Anthony was last seen alive. A thick fog of speculation and suspicion had settled over Orange County, Florida. Tips had poured in from all across the country. Search efforts led by volunteers, cadaver dogs, air surveillance, and national organizations like Texas EquuSearch had scoured Central Florida's dense woodlands, ponds, and retention ditches. Yet, despite the scope and scale of these operations, Kaylee's whereabouts had remained a mystery until that Thursday morning. Roy Kronk, a meter reader for working for Orange County Utilities, began his route just like any other. Kronk, pull the lever.
Wrong level.
I'm sure he's gotten that joke at least a couple times.
The poison for Cusco. The poison specifically made for Cusco. Cusco's poison. God bless you. Roy Kronk, a meter reader working for Orange County Utilities. So Kronk, a former bail bondsman and sometimes stagehand, had a history of odd jobs and sometimes abrasive demeanor. He's a Floridian. That morning, he was accompanied by 2 co-workers driving their assigned route and stopping periodically to read meters tucked behind homes and properties along suburban roads.
Man, city workers. I mean, I used to be a meter reader for the gas company in New York, and I never had 2 other people along me with the route.
Orlando's also massive. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, true.
So because I know, again, I'm from Florida. I know this area. They basically, the way the meter readers work here is they'll park at the end of the road and 3 guys will just split up and they'll take like 3 blocks. Each one will take a block and then they'll meet back up and move on. Because it's just so big.
Anyone, if any higher ups in National Fuel ever read this, take notes instead of just sending your people. Instead of sending your people out to the wilds of Western New York and just wishing them the best of luck.
At around 9:30 a.m., Kronk stopped on Suburban Drive, a narrow wooded road just off of a main thoroughfare, barely a few minutes from the Anthony family home. The area was overgrown and a kind of in-between zone, not developed, not protected, just a brush-filled patch of no man's land used by utility workers and the occasional kid cutting through on foot. At first, Kronk claimed he was simply relieving himself in the brush, but his eye caught something unnatural, a bag, torn, weathered, partially buried under layers of leaves and debris. When he poked it with a wooden stick, something rolled slightly, catching the light. Bone. pale and round, a child's skull. At its base, what appeared to be duct tape. He immediately stepped back. So, as a meter reader, could you imagine finding skeletal remains?
You'd be very surprised what I have found.
You've never found skeletal
No,
remains.
God, no, not that. But I'm just saying you'd be very surprised because depending on the location, you're also sometimes not just checking meters, you're checking wells, you're checking remote stations out there that are, because sometimes this probably isn't the case here, but they'll have remote stations that have basically like a, I think it was some properties have like a propane tank. Same thing, but in this case, it's natural gas and it's usually buried under the ground. So
Florida doesn't do that as much.
I wouldn't imagine
they don't bury anything underground because of flooding.
Yeah, so I wouldn't imagine that's here.
That's why you're not buried in ground in Florida either.
Yeah, they have a lot of above ground cemeteries, right?
Or you have to go down lower. You have to go down to a certain level. It's lower than 6 feet.
So I never found remains of a human. I found animal remains. I found drug paraphernalia. I found, like I said,
I found that in my backyard.
Yeah.
I found you'd be surprised what you find out there.
So the 911 call he placed was short, measured, and firm, but it didn't fully communicate the gravity of what he had found. Deputies were dispatched to the scene. As they arrived, Kronk stood by the roadside waiting for someone to validate what he already knew deep down. What lay just feet away from the road was likely Kayde Anthony. Keep in mind, he would think about this because this is national news. This is, especially in Orlando, this was huge. This search is going on constantly. So,
and he's near the Anthony home.
I remember this. I remember I was younger, but I remember this. I was old enough to remember all of this. And being in Florida, this was a big deal. So everybody was always like on edge, especially if you were in Orlando, you were on edge, like looking at everything. You weren't specifically going to look for the body, but if you saw something odd, you were going,
what is that?
What is that? And then, oh, it's just trash. And then just keep going. And that's why it kind of caught his eye and he poked it because, again, everybody was on edge. Within hours, the scene had transformed. Deputies with the Orange County Sheriff's Office arrived first, followed closely by crime scene investigators and a growing cadre of media vans. By noon, the area was cordoned off with police tape. Helicopters buzzed overhead, catching aerial footage that would soon make the rounds on every major cable news station. What had started as a routine day for a utility worker now became the single most significant development in the most watched criminal case in the country. So Roy Kronk became like national news. Not like this meter reader became almost a hero because he's the one that found the body. Like, and of course he wasn't looking for it, but he could have just looked over it and kept going. He could have poked it, went, yeah, I'm not doing this, and walked away.
Yeah.
But he chose, because a lot of people would, like, hey, I don't want to get involved.
So a little secret that is, and I don't care because I'm never going back in this industry, but just for everyone out there, your utility readers for gas, water, whatever, they see way more than you think they do. Most people think they hide stuff pretty well. They really don't. I've seen some pretty shady stuff, but most utility workers are told by our higher ups,
ignore it.
Exactly. For the reason that you don't want to risk retaliation against it, because there have been incidents. I know in New York there have been incidents where a utility worker or a meter reader or somebody came upon a property, he saw something nefarious, and he dropped the dime because, again, our natural inclination is if we see a crime, we report it to the cops. Well, they did that, and the next thing you know, the next month when the meter is being read, the new meter reader is getting shot at.
Yeah.
That's I'm not being, like using colorful metaphors. That literally happened in New York. Somebody found drugs on a property, called the cops. Someone in the house got arrested. Not everyone got arrested, but then the next month, a new meter reader who had no idea what happened, he he's dodging bullets because so and so's kid got arrested.
Yeah. So here's the kicker. The location of the remains shocked the public, not just because they had been found, but because of where they had been found. The woods on Suburban Drive were a mere 15 houses away from the Anthony home. It was an area familiar to the community, well within the bounds of the initial search radius. And yet, despite the manpower, the dogs, and the volunteers, and the media, Kaylee had been lying in those woods for months, untouched, undiscovered, quietly decaying through summer storms and autumn winds.
And I guarantee you, wherever they were staging all these dogs and whatever, was not by the house. If they had been, they would have found it pretty quickly.
Well, I'm sure that they probably looked there, but I don't think that she was there right away.
But no, I do. I think she was there the whole time. I think, again, if we talk about the dad being involved, he would know to disguise the scent so that the dogs can't get it. Dogs can't pick up the scent.
But it begs the question: if he had the know-how to disguise the scent of the dump site, why was the car still be allowed to be impounded where it would easily be discovered? Because it easily be discovered.
Well, I mean, if his plan was for it to be impounded and sit there, that's one thing. But maybe he didn't plan on his wife finding out it was impounded.
It seems like a big risk.
So,
especially if he was involved and he took the steps to make sure that the cadaver dogs didn't pick up the dump site.
Plus, you also got to remember that Florida, especially in this time, a lot of rain happens, so that washes scents away really easily. Like one spout of rain, boom, scent is washed away. It's going to be hard for the dogs to pick up.
Yeah. Another thing is, Casey never told him about the car.
Could be.
Kaylee died on Casey's watch. Casey freaks out, calls her dad. What do I do?
It could be. It could very well be. I'm still not, at this point, from what we're reading, I'm still not 100% convinced of the father's involvement. He's the more likely one to help her cover it up, but I'm still not convinced that he may have done it yet.
The discovery wasn't only a logistical failure of earlier search efforts, it was a haunting metaphor. The truth had been hiding in plain sight all along. The mystery hadn't required a cross-country chase or some deep, dark conspiracy. The answer had always been close. Too close. As forensic teams began their delicate work, mapping, photographing, and marking every fragment of evidence, the scope of the scene began to unfold. The bag was torn, likely by animals or rain erosion. Bones were scattered in a 20 to 30 foot radius, hidden beneath layers of fallen leaves and entangled in vines. A child's clothing, a small pink blanket, a plastic laundry bag. Everything reduced by time and Florida's merciless elements, yet still profoundly, unmistakably human. For law enforcement, the stakes immediately shifted. This was no longer a case of a missing person. It was now a confirmed death investigation. Not just any death, but the death of a toddler whose young life had been dissected in headlines for months. For Casey Anthony, sitting in the Orange County Jail awaiting trial on charges of first-degree murder, the development changed the entire landscape of her case. It meant that prosecutors can now anchor their case in physical evidence, a body, a scene, a narrative of what happened to Kaylee that could be reconstructed with forensic science and expert testimony. From this moment forward, the trial would no longer be a story built on suspicion alone. It would be tethered to a crime scene. The public didn't wait for the coroner's confirmation. By evening, crowds had gathered at Suburban Drive, forming makeshift memorials at the police tape's edge. People brought stuffed animals, photos of Kaylee, balloons that read, "We love you." Parents wept openly. Grandparents clutched their grandchildren tighter. It was a somber homecoming. Kaylee Marie Anthony had finally been found. Not in the way anyone hopes, but in a way that brought a kind of dreadful closure. For those following the case, the message was clear. Something terrible had happened in those woods. The next question, perhaps the most painful and necessary one, was how. When the remains of Kaylee Anthony were discovered on December 11th, 2008, it wasn't just the tragic finality that shook the community. It was the location. Tucked into the overgrowth off Suburban Drive, the makeshift grave wasn't hidden in some remote, out of the way stretch off of wilderness. It wasn't buried miles away under cover of night. Instead, it was found in a stretch of woods just a quarter mile, approximately 15 houses from the Anthony home on Hope Spring Drive. The terrain between the two locations was disturbingly ordinary. Suburban sidewalks, rows of modest ranch style houses, chain link fences, and the low hum of Florida's ever present traffic. The site lay just behind a vacant property, partially shielded by brush, a canal running quietly nearby. For those who lived in the area, it was a known patch of untamed nature, an informal shortcut for local kids, a hiding spot for wildlife, a dumping ground for yard waste and household trash. It was accessible and exposed, and yet for 154 days, it had concealed the single most sought after clue in the nation. For searchers and investigators, the proximity immediately raised uncomfortable questions. How could they have missed it? The initial search effort had been massive, supported by thousands of volunteers from across the country. Texas EcuSearch and other volunteer groups had used everything from ATVs to cadaver dogs, covering dozens of square miles of Florida terrain. Suburban Drive was on the list, but heavy rains during the summer of 2008 had transformed the ground into an unsearchable waterlogged swamp, making it nearly impossible to comb through in those crucial early days. Still, for many, the realization that Kayde had been so close the entire time was a devastating blow. Now, one of the other things that could have happened is she could have been dumped in the canal, and then with all the rain, because I remember it got really rainy then.
It lifted up.
It lifted it up and washed her on, because the canal ends up going out into the ocean.
Yeah.
It goes into a lake and then into an ocean. I know exactly I know where the street is. I've been there. And that canal would lead into the ocean. So if they would have dumped the body, eventually it would have floated out into the ocean, never would have seen it again. But with all that rain, it probably lifted it up and washed it on. So that's why it also wouldn't have been found.
So that is probably a more likely.
And then, of course, all that water means that it's washing away
Evidence.
all the scents and all of that. And then
any kind of biological,
she would have been bloated.
Would have long since, by this point, again, they're long since gone. And of course, Florida being Florida with insects and animals, probably would have taken away anything else.
The animals definitely ate her.
How, so you said is this a fairly big property, like a lot? Because you said it's connected to a canal. Is it big, or is it take
so
two
it's
steps?
Behind an abandoned house. It's probably twice the size of our backyard.
Okay. The only reason I ask
is because decent sized backyard.
Yeah, because the reason I ask is that the canal does. I think you're correct there, because simply just throwing the remains in a bush, even one if it's overgrown, still runs the risk of. Are there coyotes in?
Oh, yeah.
So imagine this:
bobcats,
an animal, a coyote, a bobcat, or a raccoon. I don't know if raccoons go after dead bodies.
Not usually.
But if some animal gets a hold of the remains in the early days of it and drags it out into the street, because again, it's an animal, it doesn't care, it's just trying to, and obviously it wasn't buried, so seems kind of risky to just throw it in the bush and be done with it. A canal, though, like you said, that reaches into the ocean, you put the remains there. Okay, at some point it's going to rain and it'll take the remains out to the ocean. All gone.
But it backfired.
Yes.
So you can see she was found here. This is the woods that she was found. There's a canal back here.
Okay, that is a lot.
A canal that runs here.
Okay, that is a lot denser than I thought.
Oh yeah, it's pretty dense.
I thought this was just
it would have washed up. So the canal runs right here.
Okay, so that is, for those of you who can't see it, this is not. I mean,
just everybody.
Yeah. But those of you who haven't seen the picture of it, I mean, I just assumed this is just a lot, just a little lot in a suburban thing. This is straight up wilderness.
Yeah.
This is the woods.
Yeah.
So actually now I can see okay, yeah, maybe throwing in the bush is something.
So like that was a doll that was found.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because her blanket was still found with her, all that. So
Yeah.
obviously, whatever happened
didn't
happened, but there was love in disposing of her.
I would
Ish.
think I would.
No, I mean, I mean, to me, it's just getting rid of the evidence.
Yeah.
That too.
So you can see. Hold on.
But as many of the theories are, the proximity of the location of the remains does, and I'm sure the investigators thought of it the moment they realized where they were. 15 houses away from the Anthony household, in all likelihood, means somebody in that household probably may have helped them.
So that's where her memorial it is. Still there to this
Oh.
day. Anybody can go visit her memorial. It's on Suburban Drive. If anybody wants to visit it, everybody's welcome. They ask to go visit it. Please don't destroy it, obviously. But it's 8900 Suburban Drive in Orlando. And this is the exact site where her body was found. And
Yeah, that is the woods.
yeah,
Like the description says it's a suburban area. This is,
I mean, it is.
yeah, I'm sure, but this seems like more like the end of the suburbs into the more country part.
Well,
Not really.
It's not. If
To me, it seems that way.
if we go, so there's the memorial. This is always like this, by the way. 24/7. There's the road. And then this is where she was found. So you can see how far back it is.
Still close enough to the road.
So
where I think he would have been right there.
He came here to
Mhm.
take a piss,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where he found her.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they always have these cones here marking it, and you can come up and you can take and leave stuff there. Next time we go visit home, I'll take you guys there.
So, but
'Cause I've
just,
been there.
but as I said, it is in a more like a legitimate forest setting, but it is still really close to the road that it runs the risk of an animal getting in and dragging it out.
Yeah, I mean it's still suburban. You've
Yeah.
still got like there's what would have ended up being her elementary school right there, Hidden Oaks.
And where's the canal from there?
So the canal runs here. So it could have.
That seems really far back. Considering,
Believe it or not, though, if that floods, remember this is Florida. That gets the ground gets liquid, and she could have been pushed all the way up here.
and they said it was the bones were scattered. So
Plus, you also have this is water here as well. She could have also. This is like a little lake.
Yeah,
She could have been pushed here and washed up there.
could have been.
So,
and if it was a rainy,
and it was very rainy at that time.
Mm.
So, to investigators, the location offered something else, a chilling reflection of intent. The fact that Kaylee's body had been left in such an accessible, familiar spot didn't suggest a long, calculated disposal plan. It felt hurried, impulsive. The scene wasn't crafted with the care of someone trying to permanently hide a body. Instead, it had all the markers of panic. The remains were left in a trash bag inside a canvas laundry bag, tossed into the woods as if the person hoped nature would do the rest. No grave, no camouflage, just distance, a psychological barrier, not a physical one. That closeness also complicated the case's emotional dimension. Cindy and George Anthony had lived just minutes away from the site for months. This is also what played into George's suicide.
Mm-hmm.
Driving past, in, to, and from their home, all while holding out hope that Kaylee might still be alive. Just think about that.
Mm.
Every time they're coming home, they're passing by this road. They were passing by where her body was. They had celebrated birthdays, taken media interviews, and watched protesters gather outside their front lawn, all unaware that the answer to their nightmare lay within walking distance. In retrospect, the irony was excruciating. The neighborhood itself became a secondary crime scene. Media descended in droves, with trucks lining the streets and helicopters circling low overhead. Residents, already wary from months of surveillance and public scrutiny, now had to deal with the realization that their quiet cul-de-sac had become the epicenter of the nation's most morbid headline. Some neighbors wept. Others watched from behind curtains as people arrived to lay down teddy bears and photographs. Children who once played in those woods were suddenly being told not to go near them. But the most unsettling aspect of the scene was its ordinariness. This wasn't a dense forest, it wasn't far away. The shallow brush and muddy terrain gave up its secrets within minutes of prompt discovery. The plastic bags that had once been white were torn and darkened by months of decay, but recognizable. The duct tape, stained and weathered, still clung to Kaylee's tiny skull. The small pink fleece blanket found nearby added a piercing element of familiarity. These weren't just remains. These were fragments of a life, a child's life, discarded and left to decompose under the unforgiving Florida sun. Forensic experts quickly got to work. Every inch of the surrounding area was photographed and gridded. Pieces of bone, tufts of hair, small articles of clothing, all cataloged with painstaking precision. But the environment had not been kind. Florida's heat and humidity had accelerated decomposition. Scavengers had scattered parts of the remains. It became clear that any hope of determining an exact cause of death had likely been erased by time and exposure. Still, the scene provided powerful implications. The presence of duct tape on the skull wasn't just suspicious, it was incriminating. Investigators believed it had been deliberately placed over Kaylee's mouth and nose, consistent with a method of asphyxiation. The juxtaposition of duct tape and a child's blanket created a haunting image. Violence paired with care. A suggestion, perhaps, of a killer who knew the child, or couldn't completely separate themselves from what they had done. And then, of course, there was the timeline. Kaylee had last been seen on June 16th. By mid-July, Casey Anthony had been arrested and charged with lying to law enforcement. All the while, these woods had quietly held their secret. There had been opportunities, missed or ignored. Roy Kronk himself had reportedly tried to alert authorities to the same area months earlier in August, but had been brushed off or misinterpreted.
If I remember from the research right, he did call like in August, but there's a couple other times that he called and was like, "Hey, there's this random bag sitting here."
That happens a lot. They just ignore very obvious tips. Maybe probably because at this point they were probably being inundated with so many stuff. It probably got lost in the shuffle. Yeah. I like to think that, at least.
His earlier tips had not resulted in a search. This revelation would come to bear heavily later in both public opinion and courtroom strategy. As night fell on December 11th, floodlights lit up the suburban street. Crime scene tape fluttered in the evening wind. Onlookers gathered just past the perimeter, standing in silence, some clutching candles. Others brought signs that read, "Justice for Kaylee." Somewhere in the distance, Christmas lights flickered on porches and trees, a jarring contrast to the grim reality unfolding in the woods. The scene on Suburban Drive wasn't just where Kaylee's body had been found. It was where the case transformed from a national mystery into a criminal reckoning. It was where a community realized that the answers they had been searching for weren't in some faraway city or exotic theory. They were in their own backyard, buried just beneath the trees. After the skeletal remains off Suburban Drive were confirmed to be those of Kaylee Marie Anthony, the case moved into a new critical phase: medical examination. The body could no longer speak, but it could tell a story, if investigators were meticulous enough to listen. Kaylee's remains were transported to the Orange Osceola Medical Examiner's office, where Dr. Jan Garavaglia, known as Dr. G, the chief medical examiner, led the examination that would reinforce or unravel the prosecution's theory of murder. But what Dr. G was presented with was not the body of a child, but the fragmented evidence of one. Bones, some scattered, some inside torn plastic bags, others found nearby. The soft tissue that often provides forensic examiners with direct signs of trauma, bruises, wounds, internal damage, was long gone, degraded by months of Florida heat, flooding, and natural scavenging. There was no flesh left to study, no organs to examine, no blood to test. All that remained was the skeleton of a toddler who had once been full of life, reduced now to 8 pounds of calcified fragments and the mystery of how she died. One of the most scrutinized elements of the autopsy wasn't internal at all. It was the duct tape. 3 separate pieces were recovered from the scene, and when assembled by forensic anthropologists, they formed a line that spanned from the lower jaw up across the nasal cavity. The tape had been clinging to the section of hair near the skull, appearing as though it had once covered the mouth and nose simultaneously. A small heart-shaped sticker was found among the remnants on the duct tape, stickers similar to those found in the Anthony home, though it was so degraded that it couldn't be used as firm evidence in the trial. So it was this way, up and down, instead of this way. So they taped it like this to cover both.
It's an odd way to, unless you were purposely trying to asphyxiate somebody and stuff. But even then, this, depending on
block the nose.
Depends on how big the duct tape is. If you position it right,
standard duct tape, it's not going to block both. It's going to be able to, if you put it up high enough to block the nose, you're still going to be able to move the bottom. This detail led Dr. G to a chilling conclusion. The placement of the duct tape, combined with its tight adherence and positioning, was consistent with a method of asphyxiation. While critics would later argue that duct tape could have been applied post-mortem or may have become repositioned by environmental conditions, Dr. G viewed it as a clear marker of intent. It wasn't merely securing a bag or holding an object. Its positioning across the airways suggested the deliberate restriction of breathing. Yet, despite the implications of the tape, there were no classic signs of strangulation or blunt force trauma. There were no knife marks, no bullets, no fractures that might point to a fall or a direct blow. The spine was intact. The skull was unbroken. Kaylee's bones offered no definitive mechanical clue as to how her life ended. In fact, there was no single physical sign that could conclusively establish how the 2-year-old had died. That absence of definitive proof forced Dr. G to make a difficult but strategic decision. She ruled the manner of death a homicide, but classified the cause of death as homicide of undetermined means, which is very rare. That doesn't happen all the time. This conclusion was far from an admission of defeat. It was a reflection of the reality of forensic medicine. Medical examiners can rule a death as homicide even without identifying the exact mechanism, particularly in children, when the totality of the circumstances, the age of the victim, the concealment of the body, the lack of explanation, and the manner in which the remains are found strongly suggests foul play. In Kaylee's case, the fact that she was never reported missing by her mother, the deceptive behavior that followed her disappearance, and the disposal of the body in a garbage bag with duct tape over her face all supported the conclusion that she had not died naturally, accidentally, or by her own hand. Dr. G emphasized that the process wasn't just clinical, it was contextual. No one in the Anthony family had claimed Kaylee died in an accident or immediately sought emergency help. No one had buried her respectfully or notified the authorities. She had been discarded in a wooded lot, wrapped in household items, and left to decompose in the elements. Those details, not just the bones themselves, painted a damning picture of a death that was not just unreported, but actively hidden. The autopsy also included toxicology testing, though the results yielded little, with no blood or tissues remaining. Any substances that may have been in Kaylee's system, drugs, chemicals, or poisons, had long since broken down or leached into the soil. The presence of chloroform, often discussed in public discourse due to its detection in Casey Anthony's trunk, could not be confirmed in Kaylee's remains. In fact, there were no chemical signatures found in the bones that could support any theory of chemical-induced death. It's really hard when the rain washes it away.
Exactly. I mean, that's probably why people believe if this death was accidental, it was something akin to drowning. Your drowning won't show up in skeletal remains. Nope. You need the lungs, and So yeah,
What remained, or sorry, the scientific ambiguity gave rise to intense debate in legal and forensic communities. To some, the lack of definitive physical evidence undercut the prosecution's narrative of murder. To others, it made the situation more sinister because it wasn't just the method that was missing, it was the truth. What remained undeniable, however, was this: a 2 year old girl had vanished under suspicious circumstances. She had not been reported missing for over a month. She was found in a trash bag, hidden in the woods, with no attempt at legal burial or dignity. And the person responsible for her well being, her mother, had spent those 31 days clubbing, shopping, getting tattoos, and fabricating stories about nannies, theme parks, and phone calls that never happened. You can tell that pisses me off.
Yeah,
yeah,
That,
it pisses me off
gives
too.
me fucking chills.
yeah. It any decent person would be pissed off by this.
Dr. G's ruling, homicide by undetermined means, may not have satisfied those looking for a courtroom smoking gun, but it drew a clear line in the sand. This child did not die by accident, and she did not die alone. Someone knew what had happened. Someone had chosen silence, concealment, and deception. And that choice was enough to define Kaylee's death not as a tragedy of circumstance, but as a crime. The autopsy findings, once presented in court, would become a fulcrum, balancing scientific limitations against circumstantial weight. And in doing so, they would force the jury and the nation to confront an uncomfortable question. When the body tells you almost nothing, do the circumstances tell you everything?
It's just what I can't seem to get past is, and again, it could be there could be other factors, but just the placement of how the duct tape went. Because again, if you wanted to make the child be quiet, like people, your instinct is to do this: put your hand across the nose, sure, be quiet, be quiet. This is a weak. It's just a very odd way to doing it. Because
Unless you meant for the child to die.
yeah, I can't imagine what it was that set her off, because everything that I'm seeing about Casey Anthony shows her is basically neglectful. And I don't care.
Her mother saying in that fight on the last night that Kaylee was alive, saying, "I'm going to take custody of your child."
Well, if I can't have her, nobody can.
That's exactly what I
Well,
think this is. I can't have her. You guys definitely can't have her.
Where's the 100-mile-an-hour tape? I'll show you how they did it.
Yeah, no.
I mean, you have to shave anyways.
Yeah, no.
So, when a body has decayed to the point that only bones remain, forensic science turns to osteology, the study of bones, to uncover the truth. And while Kaylee Anthony's skeletal remains were far from complete, they held clues that forensic specialists hoped would provide insight into the final moments of her life and the efforts made to hide what had happened to her. So, we don't hear osteology a lot. You hear anthropology, so anthropology is the profession.
Yes.
Like, you're watching Bones right now.
Yep.
So she is an anthropologist.
Yep.
But what anthropologists study is osteology.
Okay.
So you guys know I was in school for anthropology, and so what you study is osteology. So that's being able to read the bones, all of that. So when you see her doing all that stuff, like looking at the bones, that's osteology.
And that's how a lot of them anthropologists and even archaeologists use osteology for reconstructing how prehistoric animals looked, how prehistoric or long since dead people looked.
Osteology is an amazing science. It's so cool.
That's how they took the skeletal remains of Tutankhamun, and for the longest time, people always just assumed Tutankhamun was this young, dashing, heroic prince of Egypt. He was couldn't have been more
ugly.
He was very much a product of incense. It kind of killed that myth.
So
pretty much overnight.
Putting the markers on the skull, and then
and then doing reconstructions. But it's also like measuring the bones, seeing how long the arms were, this and that. Like with King Tut, they were able to see the difference, the way the eye sockets were different, because his eyes were offset, which is That's why they believe it was a matter of incest.
Oh,
Because
it was
that is very typical of incest, is offset eyes.
and that was just the more milder
Yeah.
conditions that they
Plus,
found.
he had a cleft palate. He had all of that.
He
kind
had
of
a
stuff,
lot of things wrong
which
with
is
him.
cleft palate is another sign. Not everybody that has a cleft palate is
Yeah.
part of incest, but that is a sign of it.
Yeah, it's so because before then you just had to just make guesses.
Yeah, but now osteology allows a lot of stuff. So by the time Kaylee's remains were recovered on December 11th, 2008, decomp had reached its natural conclusion. What was once a vibrant 2-year-old was now a partially disarticulated skeleton discovered among leaves, trash, and plant roots. Though the medical examiner had declared the cause of death to be homicide by undetermined means, forensic analysts knew that every remaining piece, from the skull to the smallest vertebra, had a chance to tell its own story. The bones themselves were not found in perfect anatomical position. The skull was located apart from the rest of the skeleton, a sign that decomp had likely advanced to the point of disarticulation before wild animals or water movement displaced parts of the remains. Small bones, particularly those of the hands and feet, were never recovered. Small bones were discovered still inside plastic bags. Some bones were still discovered inside plastic bags, while others were exposed. The absence of soft tissue meant that blood vessels, skin markings, and internal trauma could no longer be evaluated. The investigation would need to rely on the structure and condition of the bones alone. Experts from multiple disciplines, including forensic anthropology and entomology, were brought in to examine the remains. You guys know what entomology is?
That's fuck. I did.
Oh, it's a study of bugs.
Yes, creepy crawlies.
Hodgins.
Yes, he's an entomologist. Were brought in to examine the remains. At the center of this analysis was Dr. Michael Warren, no relation to the Warrens, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Florida, who assisted with the examination of Kaylee's bones under the supervision of Dr. G.
What was that about?
University of Florida.
What's wrong with the University of Florida?
FSU. I'm an FSU fan.
Oh,
it's a rival school.
Never mind. He's talking about his silly sports rivalry.
You're literally wearing a sports shirt right now. Two different sports.
Yeah, but they're
two different sports.
They're not rivals against each other.
And one of them can't even win a championship. Wow. The other one just won one, but the other can't win one. Yeah. And my sister goes to UF. No. The most visually striking forensic detail was the discovery of duct tape, not just found nearby, but adhered to strands of Kaylee's hair and found in the same area as the skull. Dr. Warren noted in his report that the presence of hair with root banding was evidence of post-mortem decomp. Root banding, a darkening of the root area of the hair shaft, occurs after death and was consistent with Kaylee having been deceased for a significant period before discovery. This finding placed the time of death well before the body was dumped, confirming that decomp had already begun before the remains were left in the woods.
Which again explains why the car was smelling of human decomposition because the body has been there for a while.
And probably another way that it could have happened that doesn't involve George is Casey was waiting for the rain to start. She knew that the canal would flood.
Well, here's another theory that is big in Florida. Kaylee died from being left in the car.
Mm-hmm.
It's a summer.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I've broken plenty of windows in Florida to rescue babies, rescue animals. And Florida has actually made it legal now for a civilian to break a window. If there's somebody, either a person or a animal in the car, as long as you notify law enforcement, you call 911 and say, hey, there's somebody in the car, I'm going to break this window open, you're able to shatter the window legally and not be in trouble for it.
And there's also now, because I know this from personal experience because my mom got this phone call, a lot of daycares, if you have your child in daycare and they don't show up for like a half an hour and you don't call to let them know like, hey, they're not going to be in today, whatnot,
Yeah.
the daycare will call you and be like, hey, where's this child?
Yeah.
My mom forgot to let the daycare know that my
Yeah.
brother was sick.
So that's the other thing. She could have died in the car from the heat.
Could have been, yeah.
So Florida summers obviously get really hot.
God,
So
don't want to go to
cars
Florida.
during the summer in Florida get up to 180 to 200 degrees.
Yeah, that will cook a body.
It is you die in less than 5 minutes.
Yep.
So you get cooked from the inside out. Yeah. It's brutal. I've seen it. It's horrible. One of the critical aspects of bone analysis is the identification of perimortem trauma, injuries that occur at or near the time of death. Examiners look for fractures, stress marks, or break patterns that might indicate blunt force trauma, stabbing, strangulation, or other violent mechanisms. Yet Kaylee's bones revealed none of those classic markers. The skull was intact. There were no fractures to the ribs or spine, no sign of dislocation or unnatural pressure to the bones. That absence became both a forensic limitation and a legal flashpoint. To many jurors and observers, the lack of visible trauma meant reasonable doubt. To the prosecution and experts, it pointed to a method of death that did link behind skeletal evidence, such as suffocation. And here's the thing. When you go through a jury trial, it's without a reasonable doubt. If there is a hint of doubt, there's no conviction.
Exactly, because
it's without a reasonable doubt. That's why the jury has to be unanimous.
Mm-hmm.
It's just,
especially with this case, because they are going for first-degree murder.
It's a death penalty case.
And death penalty.
Correct. Florida's all about death penalty. And yeah, so there's no signs of trauma, neck not broken, not kicked. That means she wasn't even thrown anywhere.
So
that means that even when her body was disposed, it was not thrown. It was set down, because if they had taken the body and thrown it, the bones would have shown signs of bruising or breaking.
Yeah.
Because she's 2 years old. Her bones are still pretty brittle.
Yeah, exactly.
So throwing her down on the ground, it would have broken something or fractured something. So that means she was carefully placed down. Adding to the complexity, forensic examiners had to determine whether the bones bore any signs of post-mortem modification, particularly animal activity. Small scavengers are known to move, chew, and scatter bones, especially in Florida's wooded terrain. The scattered condition of the remains was attributed in part to animal involvement, but crucially, no gnaw marks were found on the bones. This absence suggested that the plastic bags may have initially shielded some of the bones from exposure, a detail that prosecutors would later use to argue intentional concealment.
That's a pretty reasonable thing to get. She was wrapped up nice and tight, so the animals, maybe something chewed on it, or tried to take a nip, and they realized this isn't coming off. They moved on.
One of the big things is people have tried to dump bodies. Well, a lot of times the animals will take that and they'll move the body part to eat it, and then leave a bone like out in the road or something like that where it's easily found.
Which is why I was saying why I don't think she was dumped at that point where she was discovered, because again, if an animal like a bigger one like a coyote had come upon, because they're scavengers, if early on when Kaylee was decomposing, or at least more so there, that would have been a big dinner bell to an animal. So if it's near the road that close, there's just a chance that the animal grabs parts of the remains and it's in the middle of the road. They find it. But if it's in the canal or that, but if it's back that way, even if an animal did get to it, which again, there's no gnaw marks, but if it does, it's still in the brush.
That's also the lack of bruising. She throws her in the water, no impact.
Exactly.
And then it's slowly lifted, floods, comes up,
because I'm assuming,
and then it drains.
Because I'm assuming there's always water in there, maybe not enough to flood it out of the canal.
The canal?
Yeah.
Oh, that canal's always full.
So
not full, but it's about halfway.
So that's plenty for a 2-year-old. That's plenty enough to put them.
Oh yeah.
Or to dump them in the water and then be like, okay, out of sight, out of mind, bye bye.
Perhaps one of the most chilling forensic revelations was the material found with the remains. Alongside Kaylee's bones were found a toddler-sized shirt, shorts, and a baby blanket. Items recognizable to her family, which is how they did the initial identification. The clothing matched what her grandmother, Cindy Anthony, recalled Kaylee wearing the last time she saw her. The shirt was decorated with the words "Big Trouble Comes in Small Packages," a hauntingly ironic message that would linger in the public consciousness, and that became a headline. Yeah.
And that had to because I'm assuming Cindy probably was one of the ones that
Maybe.
identified her.
Oh, yeah, she did.
That had to just kill her.
Doesn't matter. When they found the body, Casey's been in jail.
Yeah, she's in jail. The presence of the duct tape found near the skull and hair became a focal point in the forensic narrative. Dr. Warren and other experts theorized that the tape had been placed over Kaylee's mouth and nose prior to decomp, a form of suffocation that wouldn't leave behind skeletal evidence but would align with the duct tape's placement. Even though the tape itself had degraded, forensic photography allowed analysts to superimpose its dimensions over the skull, reinforcing the theory that it could have functioned as a lethal obstruction. But the case wasn't without controversy. Some experts disputed the duct tape theory, arguing that its positioning could have changed over time or occurred during disposal. Others pointed to the lack of DNA on the tape as a red flag, which water washes that away. Still, the prosecution maintained that duct tape, with or without DNA, was an unusual and ominous item to be found on a child's face. Its mere presence on a discarded child's skull wrapped in plastic bags was not coincidental. It was a message and possibly a method. To build further forensic support, botanical evidence was also examined. Roots had grown through the eye sockets of the skull, which not only provided a clue as to how long the body had been there, but also that the skull had remained undisturbed for a significant period. According to expert testimony, the root growth indicated that Kaylee's remains had been at the location for months, consistent with her having gone missing in June and being found in December. This directly contradicted defense theories that the body had been placed at the site much later or had been moved. So it had been there for a while.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the bones, silent but enduring, told a partial story. They revealed time. They revealed placement. They revealed decomposition, but they did not reveal the cause of death. For others, it was enough. When combined with the circumstances, a child never reported missing, a body found discarded in trash bags, and a mother engaged in party-going and fabrication, the absence of trauma didn't erase suspicion, it amplified it. And while the forensic analysis did not give a definitive answer to how Kaylee died, it formed something more profound. That someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase the evidence of her life and her death. What the bones lacked in clarity, they delivered in consequence. They were a silent testament to the finality of neglect, concealment, and unspeakable loss. The confirmation that Kaylee Marie Anthony's skeletal remains had been found in the woods less than half a mile from her grandparents' home shattered any lingering hope that she might still be alive. For the Anthony family, already tangled in national scrutiny, public outrage, and their daughter's capital murder trial, the discovery brought with it not just grief, but a firestorm of emotional collapse, denial, defiance, and deepening divisions. For Cindy Anthony, Kaylee's disappearance had always been accompanied by an undercurrent of optimism. She had clung to the belief, even when the timeline didn't make sense, even when Casey refused to cooperate, that her granddaughter would be found alive. This hope had become her shield against a rising tide of suspicion and a country quick to cast judgment on her daughter. When authorities confirmed that the skeletal remains belonged to Kaylee, that shield crumbled. Cindy's reaction was not captured in a single outburst or press statement. It unfolded in fragments, observed by those close to the case and etched in the footage of news crews staking out the family's home. She retreated from the press, refusing to speak publicly in the immediate aftermath. It was a marked shift from the woman who just weeks earlier had held emotional press conferences and pleaded with America to help bring Kaylee home. Privately, Cindy's grief was described as complex, crushing maternal sorrow layered with impossible reality that her daughter might be responsible. Her public image, however, remained anchored to defense. Despite the evidence, Cindy continued to support Casey. She doubled down on statements that Kaylee had drowned by accident, possibly in the pool. She insisted that the media investigators had twisted the truth. And when later pressed about the duct tape or the plastic bags, she offered rationalizations. Perhaps the tape had been used to seal the bags or animals had disturbed the scene. Many saw her reaction as denial. Others saw it as a mother's desperate attempt to protect the only daughter she had left. But whatever the lens, Cindy's response added fuel to a narrative that was no longer just about a murdered child. It was about a family unraveling under the weight of grief, guilt, and national condemnation. George Anthony's reaction to the discovery of Kaylee's body was less publicly visible, but deeply consequential. In the days that followed, George appeared withdrawn. His face, once regularly seen on camera, was no longer front and center. There were no public appeals, no declarations, no defenses. Behind the scenes, however, George was struggling. Like Cindy, who still seemed to believe in Casey's innocence, George's faith in his daughter had begun to fracture much earlier, and the discovery of Kaylee's remains seemed to confirm what he had feared but not dared to say out loud. There's a quiet violence to the kind of grief George experienced, the kind of grief born not only from loss but from betrayal. The betrayal of a daughter who had lied to him, manipulated him, and might have caused the death of the granddaughter he adored. Those close to the family said George carried Kaylee's death as a personal failure. As a former law enforcement officer, he had sworn an oath to protect. In the end, he had failed to protect his own family. Weeks after the remains were discovered, George would attempt to take his own life in a Daytona Beach motel room. The suicide note he left behind spoke volumes. A 5-page letter filled with anguish, guilt, and an aching desire to be with Kaylee again. He referenced his inability to cope, to understand, to function in a world without his granddaughter. His suicide attempt made headlines, and although he survived, it marked a critical moment where the public saw the emotional toll this case had taken on the man often perceived as stoic. George's breakdown became symbolic, not just of grief, but of a fracture in the family narrative. While Cindy clung to the story that Casey was innocent and Kaylee's death had been an accident, George had begun to drift towards acceptance, if not of Casey's guilt, then of her role in something unforgivable. And that was significant. The media never crucified him for trying to kill himself. That it was very much a we feel his grief.
Yeah, I can understand that.
Lee Anthony, the often overlooked third member of the household, even to this day, maintained a more distant presence both during Kaylee's disappearance and after her remains were found. But his role within the family unit and his reaction to Kaylee's death was not insignificant. During interviews and depositions, Lee had shown frustration at being kept in the dark by his sister and parents. He admitted to being excluded from key discussions and decisions. After Kaylee's body was discovered, that distance seemed to widen. He became more guarded, less involved with public appearances, and largely absent from the media storm. Yet beneath the surface, Lee was reportedly devastated. He had shared a close bond with Kaylee, frequently visiting and helping with her care. When questioned later in court proceedings, his emotional reaction, including the moment he tearfully testified about not being told that Casey was pregnant, offered a rare, vulnerable glimpse into his internal conflict. In many ways, Lee became a symbol of what the family lost beyond Kaylee: trust, communication, and unity. And by all accounts, Lee was a great uncle. He was a great brother, a great son. He was just distant.
He got shafted.
Oh, he did.
Well, I think with Lee, because if I remember right, he's the oldest.
Correct.
He didn't have the problems that Casey
No, he was
did.
a good kid.
Yeah. Casey was one that was constantly lying and everything, that his parents are like, okay, well, you're fine. We don't need to do anything worry about you. So they put all their insights on Casey. And it's sad that he wasn't even told Casey was pregnant with Kaylee.
That's
I can understand, okay, you weren't home or anything, but that's a phone call being like, hey, by the way, your sister's pregnant.
Yeah.
Your teenage sister's pregnant.
Well, there was... So, you know that they had DNA tested him as Kaylee's father.
Yes.
So, because the defense tried to say that he molested her as a child.
I thought it was the father they said molested.
No, it
Both.
was Lee.
It was both.
Which Lee denied. There was no evidence ever. And then there was rumors that he might be Kaylee's father, which led to DNA testing. And of course, it was not the father.
Yeah.
He was not the father.
The defense said both, and said it was not just Casey. It was also they're doing it to Kaylee as well.
Jesus.
Yeah. So
we go more into that in like the trial and everything.
It's really fucked up.
Yeah.
Like Lee was really thrown under the bus. And
honestly, it seems like Casey is just a born, and again, there are people who will argue to the day they die that this doesn't occur, that this is something that kids are not born with, and I will disagree with them. I think it's rare, but it happens. I think Casey Anthony is just a born sociopath.
Well,
something she was born with. She just had that disconnect. She just didn't care. All she cared about was her own personal satisfaction. And she probably coupled with a narcissistic personality that developed over time from that lack of empathy of anything.
We're not diagnosing. We can't diagnose.
That's true. I know. It's just my opinion. It's my opinion. That's just how it is. Because again, you have Lee, who is, by all accounts, fairly normal, well put together. And then you have Casey. So unless the molestation accusations are actually true, that led to something. Yeah,
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
This is Lee, by the way. Yeah, that's Lee. As of now, he still has no relationship with his sister. He got married in 2012. They had a kid shortly after that.
Yeah,
they had a son the following year. So he has decided to keep himself private.
I don't blame him.
After everything.
And that really goes with the case of nature versus nurture.
It does. And this is why I believe that very rarely, but it does happen, sometimes you're just born bad. Yeah. Casey, in my opinion, and again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I've never studied it, but just what I've observed, sometimes you're just born bad, and Casey was born bad because, again, you have two, what I would assume, fairly loving parents. I don't believe in any history. There was any history of abuse, and anything she says, I just simply don't believe it. And barring the fact that Lee is fine, for all accounts, he's fine. Again, taking what's happened with Kaylee out of the picture, he's well put together. You have to just say, okay, so what happened to Casey at some point in her life that made her be this way? Either something happened that the parents are just not aware of, or she was just born bad.
Yeah.
And then she just, they just didn't address it. But again, how do you address sociopaths?
The discovery of Kaylee's remains didn't just bring grief. It deepened the cracks already threatening to split the Anthony family apart. Each member now responded to the tragedy in isolation. Cindy with her public defenses, George with a silent collapse, Lee with his emotional withdrawal, and Casey locked away awaiting trial, maintaining her innocence with eerie composure. The media seized on the dysfunction. Every moment of tension, every inconsistency, every shift in tone became a headline. There were questions about who believed whom, who was telling the truth, and whether the Anthonys were covering for their daughter or covering for themselves. The tragedy wasn't just the death of a child, it was the collapse of a family under the unrelenting pressure of truth, media, and the unbearable weight of guilt. By mid-December 2008, the Casey Anthony case had become a cultural juggernaut. It no longer existed solely in courtrooms or family kitchens. It had exploded into every corner of the American psyche. Once the skeletal remains of Kaylee Marie Anthony were confirmed to have been found in a wooded area near the Anthony home, the story transformed yet again. The public's perspective, previously marked by confusion and grim curiosity, sharpened into outrage, heartbreak, and conviction. Casey Anthony, once seen by some as a distraught young mother in over her head, was increasingly viewed as something else entirely. And that shift would have profound consequences for what followed. At the beginning of the case, there was ambiguity. Much of the public was shocked and unsettled, but There remained a lingering uncertainty. Could this just be a case of misunderstanding? Was Kaylee still alive? Could Casey, young, attractive, and largely unknown to the public, have simply made a terrible mistake? But the confirmation that Kaylee was dead and that her body had been hidden in a bag and discarded in the woods destroyed any illusions of ambiguity. The physical reality of her death had a visceral impact. This was no longer a missing child case, it was a murder, and the victim was a 2-year-old girl. The case stopped being a story of potential tragedy and became, in the public's eyes, a morality play. Casey was no longer the mother of a missing child. She was cast almost overnight as the villain of a true crime drama that was unfolding in real time. Her silence, her past lies, her refusal to assist investigators, and the photographs of her out partying during the time her daughter was allegedly missing, all of it was re examined under a new and damning light. The 24/7 media cycle did more than report on the public reaction. It helped amplify and shape it. With Kaylee's remains now confirmed, cable news shows pivoted hard. Headlines became harsher, segments grew more speculative. Commentators no longer asked, "Where is Kaylee?" but "Why did Casey kill her?" The presumption of innocence may have still existed inside the courtroom, but outside, it had all but vanished. Nancy Grace. I fucking hate this lady. Nancy Grace, then a dominating presence in primetime legal commentary, which she has now been. She has no legs to stand on anymore, Nancy Grace.
I think everybody got sick and tired.
I mean,
I don't even know who that is, so.
You count your blessings.
You've probably seen her.
Probably.
She was
big fucking hair.
Yeah, she was a big time for her time. She was a big time Fox News correspondent.
Oh, that.
That's Nancy Grace.
Yeah.
Southern lady that ended up lying about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, she was at that point, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bill O'Reilly had really stepped back from the spotlight. Yeah. And everybody was trying to fill his shoes.
She's a lawyer she's an actual lawyer. But she ended up becoming a legal commentator, like a journalist and stuff. She had the Nancy Grace show. That went on for like 11 years.
Oh, that Nancy Grace.
Yes.
Okay.
The Nancy Grace show. It was on for like 11 years and it stopped in like 2016. So Nancy Grace, then a dominating presence in the primetime legal commentary, referred to Kaylee's death as America's little girl lost. She openly questioned the credibility of the Anthony family, dissected Casey's every facial expression, and coined phrases like "tot mom." She's the one that came up with that fused scorn with satire. Other hosts followed suit: CNN, HLN, Fox News, and every morning shows couldn't resist the ratings power of this case. The public was tuning in not just for updates, but for analysis, emotional catharsis, and increasingly to see Casey vilified. And eventually, so I will say, SNL never made fun of Kaylee, but SNL did make fun of Casey a lot. Yeah. Well, they had this whole thing. SNL does have a line. They would never cross that.
Yeah, a lot of people.
Lauren won't push it. Will only push it so far. Yeah.
A lot of people will pick on like the mother, but they never pick on children.
They would never do that.
Online forums exploded with discussion. Facebook pages were launched demanding justice for Kaylee. YouTube compilations of Casey's interviews and dispositions went viral. Depositions. That should be depositions. Went viral. Disposition is different than a deposition.
No, I think it was that word.
Dispositions? That's like her stance on something.
I don't know.
I would think it would be deposition. Everyone, it seemed, had a theory, and a few of them gave Casey the benefit of the doubt. She became a meme, a symbol, a target.
I'm sorry, but even the most friendly version of this still has Casey 100% responsible, and she should be crucified for this. Because, again, sociopath. She doesn't care. Yeah. Which is why I still, even right now as I'm thinking about it, I still can't think that duct tape across, like, up and down the face wasn't really the cause of death. I just because her whole demeanor speaks of, I don't give a crap, whatever. The theory you said, she was put in the car and died, that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Because it explains it explains the car, like the car smelling.
Yeah. One of the most potent forces behind the public's turning tide was a long-standing cultural archetype, the bad mother.
Mm-hmm.
American society, for all its complexity, maintains a deeply ingrained expectations of how women, especially mothers, should behave in times of crisis. And Casey Anthony violated nearly all of them. Rather than sobbing on camera or organizing search parties, Casey had gotten a tattoo that said Bella Vita. Rather than showing public despair, she had been seen dancing at clubs, shopping, and cozying up with boyfriends. Her actions, while not criminal on their own, read as callous and narcissistic. To many observers, it didn't just seem like she was grieving, it seemed like she didn't care at all. This perceived emotional void became central to how the public judged her. The death of a child is one of the few tragedies that elicits nearly universal sympathy and sorrow. But the absence of that sorrow, at least in any visible traditional form, was seen as damning. For many Americans, Casey wasn't just guilty, she was monstrous.
You were right. I was wrong.
Thank you. We have that recorded.
Yes.
The only time I will ever admit that.
With the discovery of Kaylee's body, the legal system entered a new phase, but the court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. Protesters gathered outside the Anthony's home, holding signs with Kaylee's photo and phrases like "Justice for Kaylee" and "Baby Killer." Some brought stuffed animals and flowers, others brought venom. There were shouts of "murderer" aimed at George and Cindy when they ventured outside. Casey, of course, was behind bars awaiting trial, but that didn't stop people from making her the centerpiece of national outrage. People actually stood outside the jail and protested. Symbolic justice became the next big thing for those who felt the system might fail. People created tribute videos for Kaylee. They shared poems, posted daily countdowns to the trial, and organized vigils. It was no longer about the facts of the case. It was about affirming Kaylee's life and condemning her mother's. This period saw an evolution of justice as performance. People weren't just reacting, they were acting, showing their support, voicing their anger, and staking their moral position in a public arena that blurred the line between civic engagement and spectacle. The evolving public perception didn't only engulf Casey, it swallowed her family whole. George and Cindy Anthony, already reeling from the discovery of their granddaughter's remains, now found themselves trapped in an impossible position. To most of the public, they were defending the indefensible. Their interviews were picked apart for inconsistencies, their emotional breakdowns dismissed as crocodile tears, and their continued support of Casey seen as complicity. Friends distanced themselves, neighbors stopped calling. The Anthony's home, once a private suburban refuge, became a hotspot of public demonstration and media encampment. There was no safe space left. Even Lee, who had mostly stayed quiet, was not immune. For the Anthony's, grief was no longer personal, it was political. And it was judged in real time by a public that demanded accountability not just from Casey, but from anyone who dared stand by her. The shift in public perception didn't just impact society's feelings, it changed the stakes of the trial. Prosecutors now knew that the world was watching and expecting a conviction. The defense, already facing an uphill battle, now had to contend with a jury pool steeped in bias. And the media, they were already preparing for wall-to-wall coverage. By the end of 2008, what had started as a missing persons case had become a full-fledged cultural phenomenon. The question was no longer just what happened to Kaylee, but what will happen to Casey, and whether America could stomach the answer if it wasn't what they were already convinced it should be. Honestly, we really don't need to dig into the scene. We're kind of to the point where digging into the scene is not going to do anything. We already know that there was rod and root growth and all that kind of stuff. And in our notes, we have that we're looking at the duct tape again and all that. We've kind of already gone over that. So I don't want to, it's like beating a dead horse.
And it's probably about the same with the.
And it is. It's
next part too.
All of it's kind of the same.
It just goes a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, but people get the idea. This is a 2-year-old girl.
Yeah.
I'm fine doing it with adults and stuff like that, but
not a kid.
I have a child. So we'll kind of stop it there. The because our next part's going to go into the trial and everything. Um, and what we'll do with that is I'm going to try and find a clip of the opening statements,
Okay.
and we will play the opening statement clips, and have that at the beginning of the next episode.
Yeah, I did try to avoid those because I was already I'm glad that I did it. I wrote it the way I did. I wasn't just gonna be like, burn the bitch. So
I mean, would anyone really blame us?
no, that was gonna be like the first page of the entire, like the only page, just burn the bitch.
Okay, so
There's an argument for me.
in the wake of the discovery beneath the trees, what had once been a missing child case became a full blown criminal investigation surrounded by heartbreak, outrage, and unanswered questions. The silent bones uncovered near the Anthony home spoke volumes, but they also left devastating gaps. No cause of death, no witnesses, no clear narrative of what truly happened to Kaylee. The autopsy offered only the phrase homicide of undetermined means, and in that ambiguity, the public's imagination filled in what the science could not. Forensics revealed that this wasn't simply a loss, it was a loss surrounded by concealment, secrecy, and the suggestion of something darker. The national mood shifted from hope to fury. As media attention intensified and Kaylee's name became a rallying cry for justice, the Anthony family unraveled further under scrutiny. What had been cracks in the foundation of a suburban household were now exposed as deep fractures, visible for all the world to see. Every action was magnified, every silence judged. But if the public thought the discovery of Kaylee's remains would bring clarity, they were mistaken. What it brought was a storm, one that would intensify in the courtroom, where the fight for the truth would become one of the most watched trials of the century. In the months to come, as charges are filed and the prosecution seeks the ultimate penalty, the story inside the courtroom will clash dramatically with the one playing out across TV screens and kitchen tables across America. As accusations fly and secrets surface, one question takes center stage. Will justice be found in evidence or emotion? The trial is about to begin, but so is the unraveling of a story far more twisted than anyone expected. So, with that, I want to thank everybody for listening and thank you for visiting the Scarlet Tavern. Please remember to turn in your glasses, push in your seat, and as always, tip the bard. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.